A black man in a simple grey hoodie was slammed violently against the hood of a police cruiser, his hands aggressively yanked behind his back. The two smirking officers thought they had just bagged another easy target in an affluent neighborhood. They had no idea they had just handcuffed their brand-new boss. The city of Belmont, Pennsylvania, was a ticking time bomb. For over a decade, the Belmont Police Department had been rotting from the inside out. Under the disastrous tenure of former Chief Thomas O'Grady, the department had become infamous for corruption, excessive force, and a deeply entrenched culture of racial profiling. The Department of Justice was circling, threatening to slap the city with a federal consent decree. Desperate to save his city's reputation and his own political career, Mayor Richard Caldwell made a bold, highly classified move. He fired O'Grady and quietly recruited an outsider to clean house. Enter Arthur Pendleton. Arthur was a 52-year-old law enforcement legend. Born and raised in the gritty neighborhoods of Southside Chicago, he had spent 28 years in the trenches, eventually rising to deputy commissioner in one of the toughest districts in the country. He held a law degree from Georgetown, possessed a tactical mind that bordered on genius, and carried a reputation for possessing zero tolerance for dirty cops. He was a man built like a retired linebacker, broad-shouldered 6'2", with a stern, deeply lined face and graying hair at his temples that commanded instant respect. Arthur's official swearing-in ceremony was scheduled for a Monday morning press conference. Mayor Caldwell had kept the appointment a fiercely guarded secret, releasing no photos and no official statements to the press or the police union. He wanted Arthur's arrival to be a shock to the system. But Arthur, a man who believed you could never truly understand a city from behind a mahogany desk, decided to arrive in Belmont 3 days early. It was a crisp Saturday morning in October. Arthur, staying at the Oakwood Corporate Suites on the north side of the city, woke up at 5:30 a.m., just as the sun began to peek over the horizon. He laced up his running shoes, pulled on a pair of standard grey sweatpants, and threw on a faded navy blue Penn State hoodie. He didn't carry his badge, his service weapon, or his wallet. He simply grabbed his hotel keycard and his phone. He wanted to feel the pavement of his new city, to see its streets before the political theatre of Monday morning began. His route took him out of the commercial district and into the affluent neighborhood of Whispering Pines. It was a manicured, sprawling suburb filled with colonial-style mansions, perfectly trimmed hedges, and luxury SUVs parked in sweeping driveways. It was quiet, peaceful, until the distinct low hum of a Ford Interceptor's engine broke the morning silence. Cruiser 27, belonging to the Belmont Police Department's 4th Precinct, was on routine patrol. Behind the wheel sat Officer Bradley Hayes, an 8-year veteran of the force. Hayes was the exact type of cop that had drawn the DOJ's scrutiny to Belmont, arrogant, quick-tempered, and deeply prejudiced. He viewed the badge not as a shield to protect the public, but as a crown that made him untouchable. Riding shotgun was Officer Mitchell Carson, a 22-year-old rookie fresh out of the academy who was quickly learning that surviving in the 4th Precinct meant keeping your mouth shut and following Hayes's lead, right or wrong. Arthur was maintaining a steady rhythmic pace, his breath pluming in the cold autumn air, when Cruiser 27 rolled around the corner of Elmbridge Way. Hayes spotted the runner immediately. His eyes narrowed. He took in the grey sweatpants, the hood pulled up against the cold, and most importantly, the dark skin of the man wearing them. In Hayes's mind, the equation was simple and heavily biased. A black man jogging through Whispering Pines at 7 in the morning wasn't a resident getting his cardio in. He was a threat. "Look at this guy," Hayes muttered, tapping the steering wheel. "What do you think, Mitch? He looked like he belongs in this zip code to you." Carson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He squinted through the windshield. Just looks like a guy jogging Brad. You've got a lot to learn, kid. Hayes scoffed, slowing the cruiser to a crawl. Nobody in this neighborhood wears faded sweats, and we've had those package thefts over on Crestview. I guarantee you this guy is casing the block. Hayes didn't have a single report matching Arthur's description. There was no dispatch call, no bolo be on the lookout, and no reasonable suspicion. There was only Hayes's internal toxic bias. Arthur heard the tires of the heavy vehicle rolling slowly behind him. A veteran of the streets, he didn't need to turn around to know what was happening. He recognized the predatory crawl of a police cruiser sizing up a target. A cold, sharp realization washed over him. He wasn't the incoming chief of police right now. He was just a black man in a hoodie in a wealthy white neighborhood. Instead of panic, a deeply analytical calm settled over Arthur. Let's see how my officers conduct themselves, he thought. Let's see exactly what I'm inheriting. He didn't alter his pace. He kept his eyes forward, his breathing steady, waiting for the inevitable. Hayes hit the siren, a short, aggressive whoop-whoop that shattered the quiet morning. Arthur slowed to a jog, then to a walk, and finally stopped on the sidewalk. He pulled his earbuds out, turned around, and looked neutrally at the cruiser. Hayes threw the vehicle into park, the transmission clunking heavily, and shoved his door open. He stepped out instantly, resting his right hand on the butt of his holstered sidearm, an intimidation tactic Arthur recognized immediately. It was a gross violation of departmental de-escalation protocols. "Hey, hold it right there, buddy." Hayes barked, his voice echoing off the quiet houses. Arthur stood perfectly still, his hands visible and empty. The ultimate test of the Belmont Police Department had just begun. "Good morning, officer." Arthur said, his voice a deep, calm baritone that betrayed absolutely no fear. He didn't move toward the officers, nor did he step away. He simply stood his ground, observing. Hayes approached with an exaggerated swagger, closing the distance until he was barely 3 feet from Arthur. It was a terrible tactical position. As an evaluator, Arthur mentally deducted points. He's inside my striking distance, his stance is bladed incorrectly, and he's separated from his partner. Carson the rookie had stepped out of the passenger side, but hung back near the trunk of the cruiser, looking unsure of what to do with his hands. "What are you doing around here?" Hayes demanded, his eyes scanning Arthur up and down with open contempt. "I'm running," Arthur replied simply, "getting my morning miles in before the day starts." "Running," Hayes repeated, a sarcastic smirk twisting his lips. "You know, we've had a string of burglaries in this area recently. People breaking into cars, stealing packages. Funny how I find you out here, running through the exact same neighborhood." "I wasn't aware of the local crime statistics," Arthur said smoothly. "But I assure you I'm just exercising." "Yeah, well, we're gonna need to see some ID," Hayes said, extending a gloved hand. "I don't have my wallet on me," Arthur answered honestly. "Just my phone and my hotel key. I'm staying over at the Oakwood Suites." Hayes let out a harsh, theatrical laugh and looked back at Carson. "You hear that, Mitch? He left his ID at home. Classic. And he expects us to believe he's staying at the Oakwood. Those suites run $400 a night." He turned his attention back to Arthur, his tone dropping its sarcastic edge and becoming overtly hostile. "Listen to me very carefully, boy. You are going to give me your name, your address, and you're going to empty your pockets right now." Arthur's jaw tightened imperceptibly at the word boy. He had spent nearly 3 decades earning his stripes, bleeding for the badge and commanding thousands of men and women. But he kept his composure. This was no longer just an observation. It was an active investigation into his own department. "Officer," Arthur began, his tone remaining rigorously polite, but carrying a sudden, undeniable weight of authority. "Under Terry versus Ohio, You are required to have reasonable articulable suspicion that I have committed, am committing, or am about to commit a crime to detain me. Furthermore, Pennsylvania is not a stop and identify state unless I am lawfully detained under that same standard of reasonable suspicion. A generalized claim about burglaries in the area does not meet that threshold. The rookie. Carson blinked, his eyes widening slightly. He had literally just taken his law exam at the academy 6 months prior. He knew the man in the hoodie was absolutely legally correct. Hayes, however, did not care about the law. He cared about his authority being challenged by a man he deemed beneath him. His face flushed a dark, angry red. "Oh, we got a constitutional scholar here," Hayes sneered, taking half a step closer, trying to use his height to intimidate Arthur, though Arthur was still an inch taller. "You want reasonable suspicion? My reasonable suspicion is that you're a suspect in an ongoing investigation. Now put your damn hands on the hood of the car right now." Across the street, the front door of a large colonial house opened. A resident, Mrs. Eleanor Higgins, stepped out onto her porch in a plush pink bathrobe to retrieve her morning paper. She stopped clutching her robe tight and watched the scene unfold with wide eyes. Hayes noticed the audience, and his chest puffed out further. He was playing the hero for the neighborhood. "Officer, I am giving you a lawful warning," Arthur said, his voice dropping an octave, losing the polite civilian cadence and adopting the hard, unyielding tone of a commanding officer. "You are violating department policy regarding field interviews, you are circumventing the Fourth Amendment, and you are acting on implicit bias. I strongly suggest you step back, get back in your vehicle, and let me finish my run." That was the match in the powder barrel. "Are you threatening a police officer?" Hayes yelled. Before Arthur could blink, Hayes lunged forward. He grabbed the front of Arthur's Penn State hoodie, twisting the fabric into his fist, and violently shoved the 52-year-old man backward. Arthur's combat reflexes, honed from years on the gang task force, instantly fled to life. His muscles tensed, and his center of gravity dropped. It would have taken him exactly 2 seconds to break Hayes's grip, sweep his leg, and put the arrogant officer face first into the concrete. But no, Arthur thought, forcing his muscles to relax. Let them hang themselves. Let them document their own demise. Arthur allowed himself to be manhandled. Hayes spun him around roughly and slammed him chest first onto the cold, hard steel of the cruiser's hood. The impact knocked the wind out of Arthur for a split second. "Grab his other arm, Mitch," Hayes barked. Carson hesitated, rushing forward, but looking sick to his stomach. "Brad, wait. He didn't even do anything." "I said grab his damn arm!" Hayes roared. Reluctantly, the rookie grabbed Arthur's left wrist. Hayes wrenched Arthur's right arm behind his back with unnecessary, agonizing force, pushing Arthur's shoulder joint to its absolute limit. "Stop resisting!" Hayes shouted loudly, clearly performing for Mrs. Higgins across the street, despite Arthur not moving a single muscle in defiance. Arthur pressed his cheek against the cold paint of the police cruiser, staring at the Belmont Police Department seal, decaled on the hood. To protect and serve. The irony tasted like ash in his mouth. Click, zip, click. The cold steel of the handcuffs locked tightly around Arthur's wrists, biting into his skin. Hayes patted him down aggressively, finding nothing but an iPhone and a plastic hotel key card, just as Arthur had stated. Hayes yanked Arthur upright by the chain of the handcuffs. "You have the right to remain silent," Hayes sneered into Arthur's ear. "I suggest you use it, smart guy." Arthur turned his head, slowly locking eyes with Hayes. The look in Arthur's eyes wasn't fear, and it wasn't anger. It was the cold, clinical judgment of an apex predator looking at a dead man walking. "Officer Hayes, badge number 4402. Officer Carson, badge number 5119. Arthur said quietly, memorizing the metal shields pinned to their chests. "You have just made the biggest mistake of your entire careers." Hayes laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Yeah. What are you gonna do, sue me? Get in the back of the car." Hayes shoved Arthur forcefully toward the rear door of the cruiser, pressing a heavy hand down on the back of Arthur's neck to force him into the plastic, unyielding back seat of the squad car. The door slammed shut with a heavy metallic thud, trapping the newly appointed chief of police in the cage of his own department's vehicle, as Hayes and Carson climbed into the front seats, laughing and congratulating themselves on taking another thug off the streets. Arthur sat quietly in the back. He adjusted his posture as best he could, with his hands bound behind him. He didn't say a word as the cruiser pulled away from the curb. He just stared at the back of Officer Hayes's head, mentally drafting the man's termination papers. Monday morning was going to be a bloodbath. The Belmont 4th Precinct was a crumbling monument to a bygone era. The air inside the station smelled of stale coffee, industrial floor wax, and decades of cynical apathy. Fluorescent lights flickered erratically, casting harsh shadows over the peeling green paint of the booking area. Officer Bradley Hayes marched Arthur Pendleton through the heavy double doors, his grip still unnecessarily tight on the chain of Arthur's handcuffs. Officer Mitchell Carson trailed behind, his shoulders slumped, unable to meet the eyes of the other officers milling about the bullpen. "Look what the cat dragged in," called out Desk Sergeant Tom Riley, a heavily overweight veteran who was aggressively stamping a stack of forms. Riley didn't even bother looking up until Hayes shoved Arthur toward the metal booking bench. "Caught this one prowling around Whispering Pines," Hayes declared loudly, ensuring the entire room could hear him. "Tried to give me some lip about constitutional rights. Thought he was a lawyer." A few chuckles echoed from the surrounding desks. Arthur remained entirely silent. He didn't look angry. He looked analytical. His sharp eyes scanned the room, cataloguing everything. He noted 2 officers sleeping in the break room, another playing a game on his phone instead of monitoring the dispatch radio, and the glaring absence of any mandated community policing literature on the front desk. The rot was deeper than Mayor Richard Caldwell had described. "Name?" Sergeant Riley asked, finally looking at Arthur, his pen hovering over a wrinkled intake form. "Arthur Pendleton," he replied, his voice calm and steady. "Address?" "Currently residing at the Oakwood Corporate Suites Room 412, Arthur stated. Hayes snorted in derision. "Yeah, right. Put down transient, Tom. He had no ID. We're holding him on suspicion of burglary failure to identify and resisting arrest." Carson flinched at the last charge. "Brad, he didn't resist." "Shut your mouth, rookie," Hayes snapped, turning a venomous glare on his partner. "I felt him tense up. That's resisting." Arthur filed that away, falsifying a police report, another nail in Hayes's coffin. "Empty his pockets," Riley ordered. Hayes dumped Arthur's phone and the plastic hotel key onto the scratched surface of the front desk. Riley looked at the key card, which clearly bore the Oakwood Corporate Suites logo, and frowned. For a brief second, a flicker of doubt crossed the sergeant's face, but he quickly suppressed it to protect his fellow officer. "I am legally entitled to my phone call," Arthur said, breaking the brief silence. Riley gestured vaguely toward a heavy black landline phone, bolted to the wall at the end of the booking desk. "Make it quick." Hayes finally uncuffed Arthur's right hand, leaving the left cuff to the metal bench. Arthur rubbed his sore shoulder, feeling the deep ache where the joint had been hyperextended. He picked up his cell phone from the desk, dialed a number from memory, and waited as it rang twice. "Richard Caldwell." A groggy, annoyed voice answered on the other end. It was 7:45 on a Saturday morning. "Richard, it's Arthur," he said, keeping his voice low but completely level. There was a sudden rustling of sheets on the other end of the line. The mayor was instantly awake. "Arthur, what's wrong? You weren't supposed to be in town until tomorrow." "I decided to come early to get a feel for the city," Arthur explained. "I am currently handcuffed to a bench in the 4th Precinct. I was detained while jogging. The arresting officer is Bradley Hayes. I need you down here, and bring the city attorney Thomas Weaver. Now." Dead silence hung on the line for 3 agonizing seconds. Then a string of whispered, furious profanities erupted from the mayor. "I am so incredibly sorry, Arthur. I am leaving my house right now. Don't say anything to them, just sit tight." Arthur hung up. He set the phone back on the desk and crossed his arms over his chest, leaning back against the cinderblock wall. "Calling your public defender early," Hayes mocked, leaning against the desk and crossing his arms in a mirror image of Arthur. "It won't do you any good. You're spending the weekend in county lockup." Arthur just looked at him, offering a faint, almost pitying smile. "We will see." 20 minutes later, the heavy double doors of the 4th Precinct violently swung open. Mayor Richard Caldwell stormed into the bullpen, his face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. He was wearing a trench coat, hastily thrown over a pair of pajama pants. Right behind him was Thomas Weaver, the sharply dressed, notoriously ruthless city attorney, clutching a leather briefcase like a weapon. The entire precinct ground to a screeching halt. Coffee cups paused halfway to mouths. Telephones went unanswered. Sergeant Riley dropped his pen, scrambling to his feet, so fast his rolling chair slammed into the wall behind him. "Mr. Mayor," Riley stammered. What are you doing here on a Saturday?" Mayor Caldwell ignored him completely. His furious eyes swept the room until they landed on the metal booking bench. When he saw Arthur Pendleton, the man he had personally begged to save his city, the man who commanded the respect of the entire Department of Justice, handcuffed to a wall like a common criminal, the mayor looked like he was about to have a stroke. "Get those handcuffs off him right this second," Caldwell roared, his voice echoing off the concrete walls with enough force to rattle the windows. Hayes stepped forward, blinking in utter confusion. "Mr. Mayor, with all due respect, this man is a suspect in a—" "If you finish that sentence, officer, I will personally see to it that you never work in this state again." Caldwell screamed, marching directly into Hayes's personal space. "Sergeant Riley keys now." Riley practically vaulted over the desk, his hands shaking violently as he fumbled with his keyring. He jammed the small key into the cuffs binding Arthur's wrist and twisted. The metal jaws clicked open. Arthur stood up slowly, rubbing his wrist. He towered over the mayor and the surrounding officers. "Mayor Caldwell, what is going on here?" Hayes demanded, his arrogance finally giving way to a creeping, icy dread. "Who is this guy?" Caldwell spun around, pointing a trembling finger directly at Hayes's chest. "This man is Richard." Arthur interrupted his booming baritone, cutting through the panic of the room like a machete. Caldwell stopped looking at Arthur. Arthur shook his head, once a subtle, commanding gesture. He did not want his title revealed in this dirty, isolated room. He wanted the entire department to see the consequences of this behavior. He wanted a public execution. "I am a personal guest of the mayor," Arthur said, his eyes locking onto Hayes with a predatory intensity. "And I believe we are finished here for today." Caldwell swallowed hard, understanding the play. He turned back to Hayes and Riley, his voice shaking with suppressed rage. "You release him immediately. No charges, no paperwork. And I suggest you all pray for your pensions." Hayes stood frozen, the color draining from his face, as he watched the black man in the grey hoodie walk out of the precinct, flanked by the mayor and the city attorney. Carson, standing in the corner, looked like he was going to throw up. He knew they had crossed a line, but he had no idea just how catastrophic that line was. The atmosphere inside the Belmont Police Headquarters assembly room crackled with palpable anxiety. Monday morning had finally arrived. 300 officers, detectives, and command staff packed the rows, whispering furiously about the incoming Department of Justice investigation and the sudden ousting of their former leadership. In the third row, Officer Bradley Hayes sat with his arms crossed, sweating through his uniform collar, despite his desperate attempts to project arrogance. Beside him, Rookie Mitchell Carson stared blankly at his polished boots, a sickening knot of dread twisting in his gut ever since Saturday morning's highly questionable arrest. At exactly 9 a.m., Mayor Richard Caldwell stepped up to the podium. The vast auditorium fell into a suffocating, heavy silence. For too long, this department has operated under a cloud of controversy and fractured community trust. Caldwell announced, his voice echoing sharply off the acoustic panels. That ends today. It is my profound honor to introduce the man who will rebuild the Belmont Police Department. Please welcome your new Chief of Police, Arthur Pendleton. From behind the heavy velvet curtain, Arthur stepped into the glaring stage lights. He was no longer wearing a faded Penn State hoodie and sweatpants. He was clad in a pristine, tailored midnight blue Class A uniform. Brass buttons gleamed, and 4 shining gold stars were pinned perfectly to his crisp collar. In the third row, Hayes's heart completely stopped. The blood vanished from his face, leaving him a sickening shade of grey. His brain violently rejected the reality standing before him. Carson buried his face in his trembling hands, a silent gasp catching in his throat. Arthur approached the microphone. His posture was immovable, his presence radiating a terrifying, absolute authority. His sharp eyes scanned the sea of faces, cutting through the crowd, until they locked directly onto Bradley Hayes. 2 days ago, Chief Pendleton began his deep baritone, carrying a lethal, quiet calm. I arrived in this city early. I went for a morning run. I wanted to see exactly how the citizens of Belmont are treated by the men and women who wear this badge. The silence in the auditorium deepened. Not a single chair creaked. I was stopped without reasonable suspicion. Arthur continued, his voice steadily rising, vibrating with righteous fury. I was violently assaulted, unlawfully restrained, and falsely accused of resisting arrest. The officers who did this had no idea I was their incoming chief. And that is exactly the point. The Constitution does not care about your personal prejudices, and neither do I. Arthur extended a steady hand, pointing directly at the third row. Officer Bradley Hayes, stand up. Hayes's legs shook violently as he rose to his feet, thoroughly humiliated, beneath the glaring stares of 300 peers. Turn in your badge. You are terminated effective immediately, Arthur ordered. Captain Jenkins, take him. From the wings, the head of Internal Affairs stepped forward, flanked by 2 towering state troopers. The room watched in stunned silence as the troopers marched down the aisle, spun Hayes around, and snapped handcuffs onto his wrists. The distinct click-zip-click echoed through the massive hall, the exact same sound Arthur had endured just 48 hours prior. Hayes was marched out the back doors, his career instantly obliterated. Arthur then turned his heavy gaze to the rookie. Officer Carson, you stood by while a citizen's rights were trampled. You are stripped of your patrol duties and relegated to the desk for 6 months of intensive constitutional retraining. Sit down. Carson collapsed into his seat, weeping in absolute relief. Arthur gripped the edges of the podium, surveying his new department. The era of cowboy policing in Belmont is dead. If you believe this badge makes you above the law, I will personally put you in a cage. But if you are here to protect and serve, I will stand shoulder to shoulder with you against any threat. The choice is yours. Dismissed. Did this intense story of justice and accountability keep you on the edge of your seat? The fight against corruption is an ongoing battle, and stories like Chief Arthur Pendleton's remind us that true leadership requires courage. If you enjoyed this dramatic twist and want to see more real-life inspired stories of justice prevailing, hit that like button, share this video with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling content every week.